Imagine waking up every single day with nothing. No job, no home, no hope. You're stuck in a cycle where every day feels like a struggle to just survive. You've made mistakes, lost people, and had doors slammed in your face more times than you can count. But what if I told you that the very thing you think is holding you back, the struggle, the pain, the failures, could actually be your greatest asset? What if those moments were the key to your transformation? In this story, you'll meet a man who was once you, a man with no future, no prospects, but instead of sinking deeper into despair, he made a choice, a decision that goes against everything society tells you about success. It's a choice that defies logic and challenges everything you believe about what it takes to rise above. His journey from homeless to millionaire is a wake-up call, a reminder that success doesn't come from playing it safe. It comes from daring to take risks, to defy the odds, and to believe in yourself when the world tells you that you don't belong. Stick around, because this is the kind of story that could change the way you see your own life. The kind of story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about success. Don't blink. You're about to witness a transformation like no other. It was a cold winter morning in Violet Creek, a city known for its sharp contrasts between wealth and poverty. The sun barely peeked through the overcast sky, and the wind bit at the skin of anyone brave enough to be outside. The streets, slick with ice, were mostly deserted, save for a few people rushing to work, their heads down to avoid the chill. On a worn park bench, covered in layers of tattered blankets, Marcus Williams stirred, his eyes flickering open. The ache in his bones from another cold night on the streets made it hard to move, but he had learned to get used to the discomfort. At 30 years old, Marcus had seen more than most people his age could ever imagine. His once proud body had been worn down by the weight of survival, his clothes ragged and dirty from countless nights spent in alleys or, like now, on park benches. He rubbed his face with a gloved hand, a futile attempt to shake off the grogginess and the weight of despair. His brown eyes, tired but sharp, scanned the park around him. Violet Creek was one of those cities where the rich never seemed to notice the poor, and the poor never seemed to look up from their struggle. Marcus had been one of the invisible for years now, trapped in a cycle of hopelessness. He had grown up here in the rough parts of the city, where dreams were often crushed before they could even begin. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the sunlight tried to break through the clouds, or the way the people passing by seemed so busy with their own lives. Maybe it was just the desperation of knowing that without change, he was going to end up just like the other forgotten souls who roamed the streets, sick, tired, and invisible. As he sat up, stretching stiff muscles, he noticed a small group of people walking by. They didn't glance at him. They never did. But then one man did. A middle-aged man, maybe in his late 40s, tall and neatly dressed in a dark coat, paused as he saw Marcus looking up. There was something in the man's eyes, a mixture of curiosity and something else, something softer. Marcus didn't expect anyone to stop. He was used to being passed by, ignored and overlooked. But this man's gaze held just for a moment. "Hey," the man said, taking a step closer. "You all right?" Marcus blinked, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to anyone speaking to him like this, not without a hint of judgment or pity. "I'm fine," Marcus replied, his voice rough from disuse. He wasn't sure if he even believed it himself. The man smiled, and Marcus noticed the kind lines on his face. The man's eyes weren't filled with judgment or discomfort, just curiosity and a kind of open concern. "Here," the man said, holding out a steaming cup of coffee. "I know it's not much, but it's warm." Marcus hesitated. He hadn't had a real meal in days, and the warmth from the coffee would be a welcome relief against the bitter cold that clung to his bones. Slowly, he reached out and took the cup, grateful for the simple kindness. "Thank you," Marcus muttered, his throat tightening. The man nodded, and they stood in silence for a moment, watching the world pass by. The wind picked up, rustling the branches of the bare trees, but it felt like time had slowed down just for a little while. For the first time in a long time, Marcus didn't feel invisible. "You know," the man began, breaking the silence, "I've been where you are. Not exactly, but I get it. Life can hit hard, and sometimes it feels like it's all you can do to just keep breathing, but you don't have to stay where you are." Marcus turned his head slightly, surprised. "What do you mean?" The man smiled again, more gently this time. "I'm Henry Adams. I run a business here in town. I've been through my own share of struggles, and I know what it's like to feel like you're stuck, but I also know that change is possible. I've seen people come from nothing and turn their lives around. You can too." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe that something, anything, could change. But how could he? He had no job, no home, no future, just the streets and the bitter cold. But Henry's words stirred something in him, something deep. Maybe he hadn't given up entirely, not yet. Maybe he could still fight for something better. "You really think that's possible?" Marcus finally asked, his voice quiet. Henry nodded. "I do. You just have to take the first step. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Marcus looked at the man, unsure of what to say. He'd heard promises before. People had tried to help, but it never worked out. Still, there was something in Henry's eyes that made Marcus want to believe. Maybe this time, it could be different. "All right," Marcus said, standing up slowly, the coffee still warm in his hands. "What's the first step?" Henry smiled, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had thought. As Henry explained his story and how he'd overcome his own struggles, Marcus listened intently, a spark of hope lighting in his chest. Maybe the future wasn't as dark as he had imagined. Maybe, just maybe, it was possible to change. And as he walked away from the park, his feet lighter than they had been in years, Marcus made a quiet promise to himself. He would try. He would take that first step. The sun had barely set, and the cool breeze of early evening began to sweep through Violet Creek. The streets that once seemed so bustling in the daytime now had a stillness to them, the kind that made the city feel both larger and more distant. People were coming home from work, some heading to bars and others retreating into the warmth of their apartments, leaving the streets empty for the night. Marcus stood by the curb, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his jacket, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger that had settled in his stomach. The smell of fast food wafted from the nearby corner, but he couldn't afford even the smallest bite. Not yet. He had his pride, and today wasn't the day he would ask for a handout. He had made that decision long ago. He was trying, really trying, to change, to take control of his future. But the road seemed endless, and his feet ached from the miles of walking he had done that day, looking for work that never seemed to come. As he stood there deep in thought, a voice broke through his self-reflection. "Hey, you there!" the voice called out. Marcus turned, startled. He hadn't expected anyone to speak to him, not with the way people avoided eye contact in Violet Creek. He saw a man approaching, a well-dressed man, probably in his late 40s, with a clean-cut appearance. His coat was dark, his shoes polished, and there was something about the way he carried himself that screamed success. The man's face was kind, though, not dismissive like the others. "Yeah," Marcus responded, though his voice was hesitant, unsure of the man's intentions. "I've seen you around here before," the man said, stopping a few feet in front of Marcus. "You look like you could use some food." Marcus hesitated, looking at the man, unsure whether this was a trick or perhaps another person trying to make themselves feel good by offering a few coins. But the man didn't seem like that. There was no judgment in his eyes, no impatience, just a quiet kind of understanding. "I'm fine," Marcus muttered, not wanting to show any weakness. But hunger gnawed at him, making his words feel hollow. The man smiled slightly, as if he expected Marcus to say that. "Listen, I'm not here to offer you charity. I just thought you might like a warm meal. A break, you know?" Marcus studied the man for a moment, his instincts battling with the reality of his situation. The cold was biting at his skin, and his stomach growled loudly in protest. He hadn't had a proper meal in 2 days. He thought about walking away, but then something made him stay. Maybe it was the genuine look in the man's eyes. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his own body telling him that just this once he could accept help. I guess I could eat something," Marcus said finally, lowering his gaze, feeling a bit of shame. The man nodded, turning to walk down the street. Marcus followed him, his feet dragging, but also feeling something inside him stir, a strange mix of hope and disbelief. The two of them walked a few blocks until they reached a small, cozy restaurant that Marcus had passed by countless times but never thought he'd be able to afford. The smell of freshly cooked food hit Marcus like a wave as they entered. The man led him to a table in the corner, away from the noise of the main dining area. The restaurant had a quiet, welcoming atmosphere, warm wood paneling and soft lighting, making everything feel safe and comfortable. It was a world apart from the cold streets Marcus had known for so long. Once seated, the man ordered for both of them. Something hearty, something Marcus hadn't tasted in what felt like forever. As they waited for the food, the man turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "So, what's your story?" the man asked. "You don't look like someone who's used to being out here." Marcus glanced down at his hands, rough and worn from the years of struggling. His voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. "Life's just been hard," he said. "I lost everything a few years ago, family, job, just one thing after another. And now I'm here. I don't know how to get out of it." The man nodded, listening carefully. There was no pity in his eyes, just understanding. "I get it," he said after a moment. "I've been through some tough times too, but you know, I made a choice. I decided I didn't want to be stuck anymore. I worked hard, picked myself up, and now I'm doing all right." Marcus looked at him, his heart pounding in his chest. "But how? How did you do it?" The man leaned forward slightly, his voice low but steady. "It starts with one decision, one moment where you choose not to stay where you are. You can't do it alone, but if you find the right people, the right opportunities, you can change things. I know it's hard to believe when you're down, but you have to believe that it's possible. You don't have to stay stuck." Marcus swallowed, the words hitting him deeper than he expected. He had heard similar things before, but something about the way the man spoke felt real, felt genuine. There was no easy fix, no promises that everything would magically get better. But there was a path, a chance. The food arrived, and they ate in silence for a while, the warmth of the meal filling Marcus's stomach and lifting his spirits, even if just a little. After a few minutes, the man spoke again. "You know, my name is Henry Adams," he said, holding out a hand. "I run a business here in Violet Creek, and if you ever want to talk about getting back on your feet, I'd be happy to help." Marcus stared at the hand for a moment, his heart racing. He had never been offered help like this before. Sure, people had given him food or spare change, but no one had ever offered a chance, an opportunity to truly change his life. After a long pause, Marcus finally took the man's hand. "I'm Marcus," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "And I think I'd like that." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and possibility. Marcus could barely believe what had just happened. He had walked into that restaurant expecting another lonely night, but instead, he had been offered something far greater, a chance to do more than just survive. As Marcus left the restaurant, the cold night air felt different, not as harsh. He wasn't alone anymore, and somehow that made all the difference. The streets of Violet Creek had grown quieter as the months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and then summer, yet Marcus felt the weight of each day. The simple joy of survival had turned into something more complex now. Each morning, he woke up in a small, inexpensive room he'd managed to rent in a modest part of town. It wasn't much, just 4 walls, a bed, and a table cluttered with books and papers. But it was his space, and it was the first real place he could call home in years. Every day, he walked to the public library in the city center, his hands clutching a worn backpack filled with notebooks and his laptop. The library had become his sanctuary, the place where the world no longer felt out of reach. Marcus was no longer just trying to survive. He was determined to change his life, to arm himself with knowledge that could unlock a different future. As he entered the library that morning, the familiar smell of old paper and the quiet hum of air conditioning greeted him. He took his usual seat in the back, next to the large windows that overlooked the busy street outside. The sunlight streamed in through the glass, casting long, golden streaks across the table. The contrast between the stillness of the library and the chaos of the world outside always fascinated him. Here, within these walls, he could focus on what truly mattered, what could change his life. Today, he was studying financial planning. He had learned the basics of budgeting and saving, but now he was diving into investments, something he'd once believed was a world reserved for the rich. His fingers flew across the keys as he read article after article, taking notes furiously. Every new concept felt like a small victory. It was hard work and it was draining, but Marcus was fueled by something deeper than just the desire for success. He was hungry, not just for food, but for a life that meant something. But there were times when doubt crept in. As he closed his laptop to take a break, he found himself staring at the people around him. Some had books stacked high in front of them, others casually flipping through magazines or typing on their own laptops. They looked so settled, so sure of where they were going. Marcus, on the other hand, often felt like he was standing at the edge of a vast, dark abyss, unable to see what lay ahead. He thought about the conversations he had with Henry Adams. The man had been kind, offering guidance and opportunities, but it was Marcus who had to do the hard work. Henry's help couldn't solve everything. He had to prove that he was worthy of the chance Henry had given him. And so he buried himself in his studies, sacrificing his nights and weekends to learn everything he could. No one else would do the work for him. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Marcus began to feel the exhaustion in his bones. Sometimes, after a full day of studying, he would walk back to his room, only to collapse into bed, his body aching from the constant strain. He had a part-time job at a local grocery store to cover his expenses, and the hours were long. But he didn't mind. Every hour he spent earning money, every moment he spent in the library was a step closer to his dream. He was learning, growing, inching closer to a life that felt real, that felt like his own. But even with the progress, the weight of sacrifice was heavy. There were nights when he could hear his stomach growl, reminding him that the simple pleasures of food were still elusive. He couldn't afford to eat out anymore, and even his own meals were sparse. A can of beans here, a slice of bread there. It was all he could afford, and it didn't leave room for anything else. Marcus was often tempted to give in, to take the easy route and let go of the dream he was building. It would be so much easier to go back to the streets, to disappear into the routine of survival. But that wasn't who he was anymore. One late afternoon, as Marcus sat hunched over his laptop going through another set of online courses, his phone buzzed with a message. He didn't recognize the number, but the message was clear. "Henry Adams would like to meet with you. Please stop by the office tomorrow at 10 a.m. His heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was this the moment where everything would finally change? He had been waiting for an opportunity like this, an opening that would allow him to break through the barriers of his past and into a new life. But there was a voice inside him that whispered doubts. Was he ready? Was he truly prepared for what was to come? Marcus didn't answer his phone. He didn't have to. Instead, he closed his laptop and packed up his things slowly, as if savoring the feeling of this moment. He had come a long way from the homeless man who once wandered the streets, searching for warmth and food. He wasn't that man anymore. He had knowledge now. He had the power to make choices that could reshape his future. The night before the meeting, Marcus hardly slept. He couldn't stop thinking about the meeting with Henry. What if this was his chance to prove himself, to show that he had what it took? He ran over everything in his mind, his plan, the skills he had learned, the sacrifices he had made. The next morning, Marcus put on his best clothes, a simple button-up shirt he had bought from a thrift store, his only pair of clean jeans, and walked to the business district. His hands were sweaty, and his heart pounded in his chest. But with every step he took, he felt something else rising within him: determination, purpose. It was the feeling of a man who was no longer a victim of his circumstances. He was taking control. When he arrived at Henry's office, the glass doors reflected his image, tired but ready. He had made it this far. The rest was up to him. As he stepped inside, he knew the journey of knowledge, sacrifice, and persistence wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. It was a crisp morning in Violet Creek, the kind of day where the sun tried hard to shine, but the air was still thick with the remnants of the cold months. Marcus stood outside the towering glass building that housed Henry's business, his heart hammering in his chest. He had never been this close to a corporate office in his life, never stood before something so polished and impressive. The doors were made of gleaming glass, the kind that reflected the world around them, making everything seem just a little bit brighter. As Marcus stared at his reflection, he hardly recognized the man who stood there. This wasn't the same Marcus who had walked the streets just a year ago, scavenging for a place to sleep, scrounging for food. No, this man was different. Tired, yes, but different. He had purpose now. He was walking into this building to prove something, not just to Henry or anyone else, but to himself. He had earned this moment. Taking a deep breath, Marcus walked through the doors. The lobby smelled of fresh wood and new carpet, the scent almost overwhelming after months of living in a small, cheap room where everything felt stale. As he walked toward the receptionist, a tall woman with sleek black hair and a welcoming smile, Marcus suddenly felt self-conscious. He was still wearing the same button-up shirt and jeans from the thrift store, but now they felt out of place in a world that seemed so foreign to him. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, looking up from her desk. Marcus smiled nervously. "I'm here for an interview with Mr. Adams." The receptionist's smile grew wider. "Right, you must be Mr. Williams. He's expecting you. Please, go right ahead." She gestured toward a set of elevators in the back, and Marcus walked toward them, his feet heavy with the weight of anticipation. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Marcus stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. As the elevator ascended, he stared at his reflection in the shiny walls, his heart racing. The elevator doors opened, and Marcus was greeted by a stark contrast to the quiet, humble lobby. The office was sleek and modern, with glass walls and open spaces filled with polished desks and people in professional attire. Everything felt foreign to him, as if he was stepping into a different world. But he didn't have time to be intimidated. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn back. Henry was waiting for him in a large conference room, sitting at the head of a long, dark wood table. The man's presence was commanding, but his face softened when he saw Marcus walk in. He stood up immediately, extending a hand. "Marcus, good to see you. Come in, take a seat." Marcus shook his hand, trying not to show how nervous he felt. "Thank you for this opportunity," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "No need to thank me yet," Henry replied with a smile, gesturing for Marcus to sit down. "Let's talk." As Marcus sat, he noticed the way Henry's office was organized. There were bookshelves filled with business books, and the walls were lined with framed photos of projects and teams. There was a sense of order here, a sense of purpose that made Marcus feel like an outsider, yet part of something bigger. "So, Marcus," Henry began, leaning forward with interest, "tell me about your journey. You mentioned before that you've been studying business and investing, but what made you decide to pursue this?" Marcus took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I've had a rough time in life," he started, his voice low but determined. "I lost everything, family, a job, a home. I spent years just surviving, but then I realized I couldn't keep living like that. I wanted something more. I started studying business because I knew it could give me a way out. It's not just about the money. It's about the chance to build something for myself, to prove that I can make it." Henry listened quietly, his eyes sharp but understanding. When Marcus finished, Henry leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together. "You've got the drive, Marcus. That's clear. And that's the most important thing in any business. Knowing what you want and being willing to fight for it. But let me ask you this. Do you know what it takes to make it in the real world, where the stakes are higher and the challenges are tougher?" Marcus swallowed hard. He had spent the last year immersed in books, reading articles, taking courses. He had learned about investments, planning, budgeting, and entrepreneurship. But the real world, the one Henry was talking about, was still a mystery. He wasn't sure he was ready. "I think so," Marcus said, his voice firm, "but I know I still have a lot to learn." Henry nodded. "That's what I like to hear, the willingness to learn, to grow. That's what separates the successful from the ones who stay stuck. You can read all the books in the world, but you won't know what you're truly capable of until you get out there and start working for it. I'm offering you a chance to join my team as an assistant. You'll work with me directly, and I'll mentor you along the way." Marcus felt his chest tighten with a mix of disbelief and excitement. "You're offering me a job?" "I am," Henry said, his voice steady. "But understand this. This is just the beginning. The work won't be easy, and there will be moments where you want to quit. But if you're committed, if you're ready to put in the work, I'll help you get where you want to go." Marcus looked at Henry, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it, the chance he had been waiting for. This was the moment he had worked for, the moment where he could prove that everything he had sacrificed, everything he had endured, wasn't in vain. "I'm ready," Marcus said, his voice steady now. "I'll do whatever it takes." Henry smiled, standing up and offering his hand again. "Welcome aboard, Marcus. Let's see what you can do." As Marcus shook Henry's hand, he could feel a sense of relief wash over him. This wasn't just a job, it was a new beginning. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was on the right path. As he walked out of the office that day, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. The world outside Violet Creek seemed just a bit brighter, and Marcus knew, deep down, that this was only the start of something bigger. The sun was setting over Violet Creek, casting long shadows across the city. The streets, usually full of movement, were quiet for the evening. People were heading home, some in pairs, others alone, their faces tired from the workday. But for Marcus, there was no going home to rest. Tonight was different. Sitting at his small desk in his apartment, Marcus stared at the papers laid out in front of him. His heart raced as he ran his fingers over the documents. One was an offer to buy into a new business venture, an investment opportunity that had the potential to change everything. The other was a job offer, one he had fought for and earned from Henry Adams's firm. It was safe, stable, and steady. Marcus had been working there for almost a year now, learning the ins and outs of business, soaking in every bit of wisdom Henry had to offer. He had proven himself, and in return, Henry had offered him a promotion, one that would secure his future if he took it. But that wasn't what had him sitting here in this quiet apartment, staring at these two pieces of paper. No, the real decision wasn't just about the job or the business venture. It was about whether he was ready to take the risk, to truly trust that the knowledge and skills he had spent months building could lead him to something greater. Marcus had come a long way from the man who once wandered the streets of Violet Creek, hungry and hopeless. He had worked his way up, from nothing to something. But now, staring at the two paths laid out before him, the fear crept in. What if he failed? What if the risk was too great and he lost everything again? The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as Marcus tried to weigh his options. The papers in front of him felt like weights on his chest. On one hand, the job with Henry was guaranteed stability. It would offer him a secure salary, a clear career path, and a future that, while not glamorous, was steady and safe. On the other hand, the business venture was a gamble, a chance to become something more. He had learned about investments, about growing wealth, about the risk and reward that came with it. But taking this step meant stepping out of his comfort zone, out of the safe world he had worked so hard to build. His mind raced as he thought about the days spent in libraries, the long nights working at his part-time job, the early mornings studying business strategies, and all the sacrifices he had made. It wasn't just about money. It was about proving to himself that he could build something from the ground up, that he wasn't the same man who had once been trapped in a cycle of poverty and despair. The sound of a knock at the door broke through his thoughts. Marcus stood up, his legs stiff from sitting too long, and walked over to answer. When he opened the door, there was Henry, standing in the hallway with a warm smile. "I thought I'd stop by, see how you're doing," Henry said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You've been quiet lately. I know you've been thinking about this decision." Marcus nodded, his chest tightening. He didn't want to admit how torn he was. Marcus began, but his words caught in his throat. "I don't know what to do. I've worked so hard, and now I have two choices, and both of them scare me." Henry walked over to the table where the papers were spread out and took a seat. "I understand," he said, his voice calm. "It's not an easy decision, but I want you to think about one thing, Marcus." "What's that?" Marcus asked, his eyes searching Henry's face for answers. "Is this what you want?" Henry said, his voice steady. "I don't mean the job. I mean, what do you want out of life? Do you want safety? Or do you want to create something bigger? I've watched you grow. I've seen the effort you've put in. You've got the skills, the determination. But now you've got to ask yourself, are you ready to trust in yourself enough to take the leap?" Marcus stood there in silence, the weight of Henry's words sinking in. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about success. It was about his own belief in what he could do. Could he take the risk and build something of his own? Or was he too scared to take that final step? Henry stood up and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Whatever you choose, Marcus, I'm here for you. But don't let fear be the thing that holds you back. You've already come so far." The room was quiet for a moment. Just the two of them standing there, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Marcus looked down at the papers again, the words on them blurring as his mind raced. This was his moment. This was the time to decide who he was going to be. Someone who settled for safety, or someone who had the courage to build something bigger than himself. With a deep breath, Marcus picked up the papers. He looked at them one more time, and for the first time, he knew what he had to do. He looked at Henry, his voice steady. "I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to invest in this opportunity." Henry smiled, his eyes lighting up with pride. "I knew you would." As Marcus folded the papers and set them aside, a sense of calm washed over him. He had made the decision, and he was ready to face whatever came next. There was no turning back now, and as the evening light streamed through the window, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he was in control of his own future. The city of Violet Creek looked different now, as Marcus stood on the balcony of a sleek, modern office building that overlooked the skyline. The once distant city, filled with streets he had once walked in desperation, now seemed almost within his reach. His reflection in the glass was no longer the tired, uncertain man he used to be. Instead, he saw a man who had fought for every step he had taken, a man who had learned the true meaning of perseverance. It had been several years since that pivotal moment when he had taken the risk and stepped into the world of investments. Since then, everything had changed. The business he had invested in had grown exponentially, far beyond what he had ever imagined. His risk had paid off, but it hadn't been without sacrifice. He had faced countless challenges, made mistakes and learned from them. But through it all, Marcus had pushed forward, trusting that his decision to invest in himself would lead him to where he was now. The view from his office was breathtaking, but it wasn't the view that brought him the most satisfaction. It was the work he had done to get there, the long hours, the sleepless nights, the endless learning, and the setbacks that had once seemed impossible to overcome. He had built this life from nothing, and it had been hard, often painful, but it was his. As he turned away from the window, Marcus's gaze fell on the small photo frame sitting on his desk. It was a picture of a younger him, sitting in that tiny apartment he had rented years ago. He had been alone then, uncertain of the future, unsure of how to take the next step. But now, there was no uncertainty. He had made it. But it wasn't just about the wealth, the businesses, or the success. It was about the journey. The door to his office opened with a soft click, and in walked Henry Adams, the man who had seen something in Marcus when no one else did. Henry's face was a little older now, the years showing in the lines around his eyes, but his presence was still commanding. "How's the view?" Henry asked, his voice as steady and reassuring as ever. Marcus smiled, his eyes lingering on the skyline for a moment before he met Henry's gaze. "It's perfect. Hard to believe how far I've come." Henry nodded, walking over to the desk and taking a seat across from Marcus. "It's been a long road, but you've earned it, Marcus. Every bit of it." Marcus leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "I didn't get here alone. You know that, right?" "I do," Henry replied, a knowing smile on his lips. "But you took the steps. You took the risks. You believed in yourself even when it wasn't easy." There was a quiet pause as Marcus thought back on the journey. The late nights studying, the countless moments of doubt, the time when he almost gave up. He thought about the times when he had stood at the edge, wondering if the risk he was taking would all fall apart. But it hadn't. And now he was sitting here in a building that bore his name, with a future that stretched out in front of him, a future he had created with his own hands. "You know," Marcus said, his voice quieter now, "I didn't do it for the money, not really. I wanted something more than just the next paycheck. I wanted to prove that I could do something meaningful. I wanted to create something that mattered, something that would last. I wanted to change my life, but more than that, I wanted to change the lives of people like me. People who think they're stuck." Henry's eyes softened as he listened. "And you've done that, Marcus. You've built something that's not just about profit. You've made an impact." Marcus nodded. "I haven't forgotten where I came from. I won't let myself. I want to give back. I want to help people who are where I was, who don't believe that anything can change, because I know it can." It was then that Marcus knew this success wasn't just about wealth or power. It was about the impact he could have on the world, the lives he could touch, the legacy he could leave behind. And that was the real achievement. The million-dollar deals, the business ventures, the investments, those were just the byproducts of a life lived with purpose. As the two men sat in silence, the weight of the conversation settling in the air, Marcus knew his journey was far from over. There was always more to learn, always another challenge to face. But now he wasn't just surviving, he was living. He had built a life that mattered, and he was determined to keep building, to keep growing, to keep helping others see that they too could achieve greatness. The phone on his desk buzzed, breaking the silence. Marcus glanced at it, then back at Henry. "It's a new day," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "Indeed it is," Henry agreed, "and I've got no doubt that you'll keep making a difference." Marcus stood up, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't known before. The city outside was still there, waiting for him, but he no longer felt small in it. He had found his place, he had built something real, and the best part was, he wasn't done yet. Thank you so much for sticking with us all the way through this incredible journey. If this story has sparked something inside you, if you've felt even a flicker of hope or inspiration, then it's time to take action. What are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you ready to break free from the struggles and make that bold decision to change your life, just like Marcus did? Remember, the hardest part is often just taking that first step, choosing to believe that something better is out and there for you. So what's stopping you? What's the next move you're going to make in your journey to success? If this story resonated with you, don't let it stop here. Let it be the wake-up call to the life you deserve. Take this moment to act. And if you want more of these powerful stories, lessons, and motivation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on the next video that could change your life. Now, it's your turn. What are you going to do differently today? Drop your thoughts and goals in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going. Your transformation starts now. Let's make it happen together.